Imagine a battlefield where the loudest roar is not from fighter jets tearing through the sky, but from the silent disruption of radars, the blinding of communication networks, and the sudden precision of a missile that never crosses the border yet strikes with devastating accuracy. This is not the war of tomorrow, it is the war of today, and Pakistan is stepping into it with a strategy that rewrites the very rules of air power. Electronic warfare has rapidly become the backbone of modern air power strategy, and Pakistan's decision to invest in this domain shows a clear recognition of how wars are no longer fought purely with missiles and jets, but with information, disruption, and control of the invisible spectrum that governs every modern weapon system. In the past, having a larger fleet of advanced aircraft often determined superiority in the skies, but today, the ability to blind an opponent's radar, jam their communications, or mislead their targeting systems can be far more decisive than adding another squadron of fighters. This is precisely where Pakistan is beginning to carve out an edge. By channeling resources into electronic warfare capabilities, it is developing tools that allow it to neutralize even technologically superior adversaries, turning what would have been weaknesses into leverage points. When enemy systems cannot detect or track effectively, their advanced fighters and surface-to-air defenses lose much of their power, and the balance shifts dramatically. Pakistan's regional security environment, dominated by India's numerical advantage in aircraft and weaponry, makes this shift not only logical but essential. Electronic warfare allows Pakistan to offset those disparities without bankrupting its defense budget, offering an asymmetric solution that multiplies the effectiveness of every platform it operates. Instead of relying solely on traditional measures of strength, Pakistan can now achieve effects disproportionate to its size by investing in capabilities that confuse, disrupt, and disable enemy operations at critical moments. Electronic warfare doesn't just enhance air combat, it transforms it into a contest of intelligence, adaptability, and timing, where the side that can manipulate the invisible threads of the electromagnetic spectrum can dictate the tempo of war. Pakistan is positioning itself in this exact space, aligning with a global trend that has already redefined how major powers like the United States, Russia, and China conduct operations. By embracing EW, Pakistan isn't merely upgrading its military hardware, it is rewriting the rules of engagement in South Asia, signaling that future conflicts will be fought as much with waves and signals as with bullets and bombs. Standoff missiles represent one of the most dramatic shifts in air power strategy, and Pakistan's focus on these weapons is transforming how it approaches deterrence, conflict management, and offensive operations. Unlike traditional air-to-surface weapons that require aircraft to penetrate hostile airspace and risk exposure to enemy fighters or air defenses, standoff missiles allow Pakistan to strike deep into enemy territory from a safe distance. This fundamentally alters the geometry of combat because it expands Pakistan's reach without requiring its pilots to fly directly over contested zones. For a country facing an adversary with superior numbers and increasingly advanced surface-to-air defense systems, the ability to fire precision-guided weapons from hundreds of kilometers away is an equalizer. It reduces the risks of attrition while maintaining the ability to inflict significant damage on high-value targets such as radar sites, command centers, and logistics hubs. The psychological dimension of standoff missiles is equally powerful because they create a persistent sense of vulnerability in adversary planning. When your opponent knows you can hit them without even crossing the border, it complicates their calculations and forces them to spread resources over a wider area for defense. This stretching of enemy resources amplifies the effectiveness of every missile, making even a limited arsenal have outsized influence on strategic stability. Pakistan's integration of these weapons onto platforms like the JF-17 shows not only an adaptation to its budgetary constraints, but also an understanding that strategic advantage lies in flexibility and reach rather than brute force. By coupling standoff capabilities with its growing expertise in electronic warfare, Pakistan can both degrade enemy defenses and strike them at distances where interception is far less likely. Another important factor is how standoff weapons allow Pakistan to maintain deterrence credibility in scenarios where escalation risks are high. Instead of launching manned raids that risk sparking uncontrollable conflicts, standoff missiles provide a controlled, precise, and scalable option that communicates capability without immediately escalating into full-scale war. They also play a vital role in regional balance, because they directly counter the edge India seeks with systems like the S-400, neutralizing their deterrent value by bypassing them altogether. Pakistan's adoption of this doctrine reflects an appreciation of the modern battlefield, where long-range precision is often more decisive than large numbers of aircraft, and where the ability to influence outcomes without exposing forces to unnecessary risk is the real measure of power projection. For decades, the defining image of air superiority was the dogfight, fighter jets circling, diving, and maneuvering in close quarters to gain the advantage and deliver the decisive shot. That imagery still dominates the public imagination. But in reality, the battlefield of the skies has been quietly evolving into something far more complex and technology-driven. Pakistan's approach to air power reflects this change, moving deliberately away from preparing for cinematic close-range engagements, and instead focusing on building the tools necessary for beyond visual range warfare, electronic disruption, and precision strike capabilities. In the age of long-range missiles, stealth detection systems, and sophisticated jamming, the opportunity for a traditional dogfight is increasingly rare, and preparing for one at the expense of modernizing doctrine would leave any air force dangerously exposed. Pakistan's recognition of this shift can be seen in its efforts to integrate long-range air-to-air missiles onto its platforms, enhance its radar systems, and strengthen its command and control networks. Rather than simply matching adversaries' aircraft for aircraft, it is developing an ecosystem of technologies that allow its pilots to engage threats from distances where maneuverability plays little role, but sensors, data links, and missile range decide outcomes. This strategy also leverages Pakistan's asymmetric thinking because it allows the Air Force to sidestep areas where India's numerical superiority might overwhelm and instead fight on terms that exploit precision, deception, and timing. A dogfight relies heavily on pilot skill and aircraft agility, but beyond visual range combat relies on who sees first, who shoots first, and who can deny the other side the ability to do the same, which is why electronic warfare and long-range weapons are becoming inseparable parts of Pakistan's new doctrine. This transformation also reflects the global reality where major powers like the United States, China, and Russia have largely abandoned the dogfight-centric mindset in favor of technologies that reduce exposure and maximize kill probability. Pakistan's trajectory is consistent with this evolution, aiming to ensure that its air force is not trapped in outdated tactics, but equipped for the actual dynamics of 21st century aerial warfare. It is not that dogfighting is irrelevant, but it is no longer the centerpiece of air strategy, and Pakistan's ability to move away from that romanticized vision toward a more pragmatic, technology-driven approach is what will determine how well it can defend its skies and project influence in the region. South Asia's security environment has always been marked by asymmetry, with India holding a numerical and economic advantage across almost every conventional domain of warfare, particularly in air power. This imbalance has long posed a challenge for Pakistan, forcing it to innovate and adapt rather than compete head-on in a costly arms race. The adoption of electronic warfare and standoff missile capabilities is part of this strategic calculation, because these tools provide a way to neutralize India's advantage without requiring parity in numbers. In simple terms, Pakistan is trading quantity for quality, leveraging technologies that magnify the impact of each aircraft and missile, creating a deterrent posture that complicates India's ability to impose its will through sheer size. By enhancing the survivability of its aircraft, degrading Indian radar and communication systems, and extending its strike range, Pakistan is ensuring that its smaller force remains credible, relevant, and dangerous in any conflict scenario. This pursuit of strategic parity is not just about raw military calculations, but about the political and psychological dimensions of deterrence. The very perception that Pakistan can penetrate defenses, disrupt operations, and impose costs, even under pressure, reshapes the regional balance, preventing India from acting with unchecked confidence. Every investment in EW and standoff capabilities sends a message that the balance of power is not defined solely by how many squadrons sit on the tarmac, but by how effectively those assets can survive, strike, and outmaneuver the enemy's systems. For a state operating under significant economic constraints, this asymmetric approach is both pragmatic and essential. It allows Pakistan to sustain deterrence without exhausting its resources in an unwinnable numbers game, while still signaling that escalation will come at a cost India cannot ignore. The dynamic also extends beyond bilateral competition, because these advancements draw attention from other regional players and global powers watching South Asia's evolving strategic environment. By demonstrating the ability to modernize in ways that directly address India's most expensive acquisitions like advanced air defenses and modern fighter aircraft, Pakistan is asserting that it cannot be sidelined or intimidated. In essence, this shift is ensuring a level of parity that makes conflict less attractive and forces adversaries to think twice before assuming dominance based solely on scale, placing Pakistan in a more stable and credible position within the regional security equation. One of the most significant aspects of Pakistan's evolving air power strategy lies in how it is merging imported systems with homegrown innovations to create a hybrid model of capability that is flexible, adaptive, and sustainable. For years, Pakistan's defense posture was constrained by reliance on foreign suppliers, often leaving it vulnerable to political pressures, sanctions, or shifting alliances. The decision to prioritize indigenous projects like the JF-17 Thunder, while simultaneously incorporating advanced standoff weapons and electronic warfare systems from external partners, represents a deliberate effort to reduce dependency and foster a sense of self-reliance. The JF-17 itself has become more than just an affordable fighter platform. It is a symbol of Pakistan's determination to build an ecosystem that allows experimentation, customization, and gradual upgrades according to national priorities. By integrating locally produced standoff missiles and experimenting with electronic pods, Pakistan is not merely consuming technology, but actively shaping it to suit its strategic needs. This approach provides enormous advantages in terms of doctrinal flexibility. Imported systems often come with restrictions, limited upgrade paths, and constraints on how they can be deployed, but when domestic innovation is blended into the force structure, Pakistan gains the freedom to adapt systems in real time. For example, developing indigenous precision weapons tailored to the JF-17 allows Pakistan to circumvent the limitations imposed by suppliers and ensure that every platform can maximize its effectiveness in the specific context of South Asian battlefields. It also builds a knowledge base within the country, training engineers, scientists, and defense planners to think beyond procurement and move toward a culture of creation. The long-term implications of this are substantial, because it means Pakistan's Air Force will not only be defined by what it can buy, but increasingly by what it can build, refine, and integrate across its fleet. This blending of foreign and indigenous systems also carries symbolic weight in the regional balance, because it demonstrates resilience and adaptability. rather than being paralyzed by restrictions or forced into obsolescence by adversaries acquiring the latest Western or Russian technology. Pakistan is creating a unique path that ensures its tools are optimized for its own needs. This sends a message that strategic doctrine will evolve on Pakistani terms, not dictated solely by the pace of external suppliers, and that the ability to innovate domestically will continue to amplify every imported capability, creating a force structure that is both resilient and unpredictable in its growth trajectory. The very nature of modern conflict has shifted away from conventional set-piece battles toward a blurred space where cyber operations, electronic disruption, precision-guided strikes, and information warfare converge, and Pakistan's air power strategy is evolving to reflect this reality. Hybrid warfare is not about deploying tanks across borders or sending entire fleets of aircraft into contested skies. It is about applying pressure across multiple domains simultaneously to paralyze the adversary's decision-making and erode their ability to respond effectively. In this environment, air forces are no longer judged solely by the number of aircraft they can scramble, but by how seamlessly they can integrate sensors, networks, electronic warfare systems, and long-range weapons to deliver calculated effects without necessarily triggering full-scale war. Pakistan's pursuit of electronic warfare tools and standoff missile capabilities fits squarely within this emerging doctrine because they allow for actions that are precise, disruptive, and deniable while still projecting credible power. This approach also reflects the recognition that wars in South Asia are unlikely to resemble past conflicts, where conventional battles dominated and outcomes were measured in territorial gains. The next conflict, if it comes, will be fought in the spaces in between: cyber networks that collapse communication grids, jammers that blind radars, drones that infiltrate undetected, and precision weapons that strike from afar without ever crossing a front line. Pakistan is positioning its air power to operate effectively in this blended battle space, ensuring that it can impose costs while controlling escalation and maintaining strategic ambiguity. The integration of hybrid warfare principles makes its doctrine less predictable and more adaptable, denying adversaries the comfort of knowing exactly how Pakistan might respond in a crisis. By investing in hybrid-ready capabilities, Pakistan also addresses the challenge of deterrence in an environment where the lines between peace and war are increasingly blurred. Hybrid warfare thrives in the grey zone, where states seek to achieve strategic objectives without provoking outright war, and this demands a toolkit that blends electronic disruption, long-range strikes, and psychological pressure. Pakistan's ability to wield such tools not only strengthens its defensive posture but also enhances its role in shaping regional dynamics by demonstrating that it can operate in the same advanced domains as larger powers. This evolution in doctrine highlights that the future of air power in South Asia will not be decided by dogfights or bombing campaigns alone, but by the sophistication with which states like Pakistan adapt to the hybrid age, mastering the invisible battles of signals, networks, and precision that define 21st century warfare. What we are witnessing is not just an upgrade in weapons or aircraft, but a fundamental shift in the philosophy of warfare. Pakistan's embrace of electronic warfare and standoff missile technology is a declaration that air dominance is no longer about who has more jets or larger squadrons, but about who can see without being seen, strike without being touched, and disrupt without being silenced. In a region where asymmetry has long defined the balance of power, these advancements allow Pakistan to create parity, to level the field, and to project resilience against overwhelming odds. The skies of South Asia are changing, not because of sheer numbers, but because of strategy, innovation, and the courage to adopt a doctrine fit for the 21st century. Pakistan's shift tells us one thing with absolute clarity. The next chapter of air power will not be written by those who cling to the past, but by those bold enough to command the invisible battles of the future.